Chapter 3 of G.K. Chesterton's Charles Dickens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. G.K. Chesterton's Charles Dickens. Chapter 3. The Youth of Dickens. There are popular phrases so picturesque that even when they are intentionally funny, they are unintentionally poetical. I remember, to take one instance out of many, hearing a heated secularist in Hyde Park apply to some parson or other the exquisite expression, a sky pilot. Subsequent inquiry has taught me that the term is intended to be comic and even contemptuous, but in the first freshness of it I went home repeating it to myself like a new poem. Few of the pious legends have conceived so strange and yet celestial a picture as this of a pilot in the sky, leaning on his helm above the empty heavens, and carrying his cargo of souls higher than the loneliest cloud. The phrase is like a lyric of Shelley. Or, to take another instance from another language, the French have an incomparable idiom for a boy playing truant. Il fait l'école buissonnière. He goes to the bushy school, or the school among the bushes. How admirably this accidental expression, the bushy school, not to be lightly confounded with the art school at Bushey, how admirably this bushy school expresses half the modern notions of a more natural education. The two words express the whole poetry of Wordsworth, the whole philosophy of Thoreau, and are quite as good literature as either. Now, among a million of such scraps of inspired slang there is one which describes a certain side of Dickens better than pages of explanation. The phrase, appropriately enough, occurs at least once in his works, and that on a fitting occasion. When Job Trotter is sent by Sam on a wild chase after Mr. Perker, the solicitor, Mr. Perker's clerk condoles with Job upon the lateness of the hour, and the fact that all habitable places are shut up. "My friend," said Mr. Perker's clerk, "you've got the key of the street." Mr. Perker's clerk, who was a flippant and scornful young man, may perhaps be pardoned if he used this expression in a flippant and scornful sense; but let us hope that Dickens did not. Let us hope that Dickens saw the strange yet satisfying imaginative justice of the words; for Dickens himself had, in the most sacred and serious sense of the term, the key of the street. When we shut out anything, we are shut out of that thing. When we shut out the street, we are shut out of the street. Few of us understand the street, even when we step into it, as into a house or room of strangers. Few of us see through the shining riddle of the street, the strange folk that belong to the street only, the street walker or the street Arab, the nomads who, generation after generation, have kept their ancient secrets in the full blaze of the sun. Of the street at night many of us know even less. The street at night is a great house locked up. But Dickens had, if ever man had, the key of the street. His stars were the lamps of the street. His hero was the man in the street. He could open the inmost door of his house, the door that leads into that secret passage which is lined with houses and roofed with stars. This silent transformation into a citizen of the street took place during those dark days of boyhood, when Dickens was drudging at the factory. Whenever he had done drudging he had no other resource but drifting, and he drifted over half London. He was a dreamy child, thinking mostly of his own dreary prospects. Yet he saw and remembered much of the streets and squares he passed. Indeed, as a matter of fact, he went the right way to work unconsciously to do so. He did not go in for observation, a priggish habit. He did not look at Charing Cross to improve his mind, or count the lamp-posts in Holborn to practise his arithmetic. But unconsciously he made all these places the scenes of the monstrous drama in his miserable little soul. He walked in darkness under the lamps of Holborn, and was crucified at Charing Cross. So for him ever afterwards these places had the beauty that only belongs to battlefields. For our memory never fixes the facts which we have merely observed. The only way to remember a place for ever is to live in the place for an hour, and the only way to live in the place for an hour is to forget the place for an hour. The undying scenes we can all see if we shut our eyes are not the scenes that we have stared at under the direction of guide-books. The scenes we see are the scenes at which we did not look at all, the scenes in which we walked when we were thinking about something else, about a sin, or a love affair, or some childish sorrow. We can see the background now because we did not see it then. So Dickens did not stamp these places on his mind, he stamped his mind on these places. For him, ever afterwards, these streets were mortally romantic. They were dipped in the purple dyes of youth and its tragedy, and rich with irrevocable sunsets. Herein is the whole secret of that eerie realism with which Dickens could always vitalize some dark or dull corner of London. There are details in the Dickens descriptions, a window or a railing or the keyhole of a door, which he endows with demoniac life. The things seem more actual than things really are. Indeed, that degree of realism does not exist in reality. It is the unbearable realism of a dream. And this kind of realism can only be gained by walking dreamily in a place. It cannot be gained by walking observantly. Dickens himself has given a perfect instance of how these nightmare minutiae grew upon him in his trance of abstraction. He mentions, among the coffee shops into which he crept in those wretched days, one in St. Martin's Lane, "of which I only recollect it stood near the church, and that in the door there was an oval glass plate with 'Coffee Room' painted on it, addressed towards the street. If I ever find myself in a very different kind of coffee room now, but where there is an inscription on glass, and read it backwards on the wrong side, 'Moor Efoc,' as I often used to do then in a dismal reverie, a shock goes through my blood." That wild word, Moor Efoc, is the motto of all effective realism. It is the masterpiece of the good realistic principle, the principle that the most fantastic thing of all is often the precise fact. And that elfish kind of realism Dickens adopted everywhere. His world was alive with inanimate object. The date on the door danced over Mr. Grewgious's. The knocker grinned at Mr. Scrooge. The Roman on the ceiling pointed down at Mr. Tulkinghorn. The elderly armchair leered at Tom Smart. These are all Moor Efoc-ish things. A man sees them because he does not look at them. And so the little Dickens Dickensized London. He prepared the way for all his personages. Into whatever cranny of our city his characters might crawl, Dickens had been there before them. However wild were the events he narrated as outside him, they could not be wilder than the things that had gone on within. However queer a character of Dickens might be, he could hardly be queerer than Dickens was. The whole secret of his after writings is sealed up in those silent years of which no written word remains. Those years did him harm perhaps, as his biographer Forster has thoughtfully suggested, by sharpening a certain fierce individualism in him, which once or twice during his genial life flashed like a half-hidden knife. He was always generous, but things had gone too hardly with him for him to be always easy-going. He was always kind-hearted. He was not always good-humoured. Those years may also, in their strange mixture of morbidity and reality, have increased in him his tendency to exaggeration. But we can scarcely lament this in a literary sense. Exaggeration is almost the definition of art, and it is entirely the definition of Dickens's art. Those years may have given him many moral and mental wounds, from which he never recovered, but they gave him the key of the street. There is a weird contradiction in the soul of the born optimist. He can be happy and unhappy at the same time. With Dickens, the practical depression of his life at this time did nothing to prevent him from laying up those hilarious memories of which all his books are made. No doubt he was genuinely unhappy in the poor place where his mother kept school. Nevertheless, it was there that he noticed the unfathomable quaintness of the little servant whom he made into the Marchioness. No doubt he was comfortless enough at the boarding-house of Mrs. Roylance, but he perceived with a dreadful joy that Mrs. Roylance's name was Pipchin. There seems to be no incompatibility between taking in tragedy and giving out comedy. They are able to run parallel in the same personality. One incident which he described in his unfinished autobiography, and which he afterwards transferred almost verbatim to David Copperfield, was peculiarly rich and impressive. It was the inauguration of a petition to the King for a bounty, drawn up by a committee of the prisoners in the Marshalsea,